When I was on Young Life staff for 20 years, I spent 10 in the field and 10 in development. And I eventually was the chief development officer, but 5 years I ran Young Life in St. Augustine, and then 5 years I ran Young Life in Central Florida. And Cru was present, he's kind of newer here back then because it was the late 90s, or 1999 to 2000 something I was here. But I always had such respect for Cru, and I've always wanted to serve and get a chance to serve Cru. And Josh did sort of hear about us, but it was really a more interesting story, so I'll just tell that story. My board chair for Young Life, his name's Curtis McWilliams. He's a major donor, lives here in Orlando, is connected to CNL, and we're just friends. And so Josh's son is getting ready to go to Flagler College in St. Augustine. So Curtis actually calls me and says, can you show Josh and his son around? It wasn't a lead to help with the Jesus Film Project. It was really just my friend Curtis saying, can you help his friend Josh? They go to church together. And so I called Josh. I got to meet him and his wife. I got to meet his son. I showed them around Flagler. I introduced them to my friends that are there in St. Augustine. And at the end, Josh said, so what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm the CEO of the focus group. We help Christian ministries. He's like, oh, we probably could use your help. And so it really was just me helping a friend that gave us this beautiful chance to serve you all. And the work that the Jesus Film is doing, it's by far the biggest kingdom impact project that our firm's ever been involved with. And so it's such a joy to get to serve. And so you heard a little bit of our background and my background, and I do have 4 kids. I'm teenagers. I have 2 juniors, a senior, and a son who's getting his master's at Florida State. I never really thought I wanted to be in fundraising. My story and how I started raising money is I was in college and at the University of Florida, and I was a RA. I was a repo man for 2 companies, and I had my own gumball machine business. Okay, so that's how I was supporting myself through school. And one day, my Young Life area director said, Brad, you're good at reaching kids for Christ, and what if you could get paid and then you could stop repossessing like equipment and actually start repossessing lives for the Lord, right? And I was like, great, how do I do that? And he said, oh, it's simple. You just write letters, right? And then you get money, and then you get paid to be a Young Life leader. And so I wrote letters to 25 people. I grew up in North Palm Beach. You would think that sending out 25 letters would produce the right kind of result. I wrote a 4-page, like single-spaced, very compelling letter, not email, because it was a long time ago. But I mean, if you got to page 3, you would be weeping. I was writing it, okay? And I sent out the letters, and I waited with bated breath by the mailbox, and within 2 weeks, I had gotten 2 responses. One for $50 and one for $100. And so I went back to my Young Life staff person. I said, God is not calling me to be in ministry. And he said, so say more about that. I said, well, I sent out these letters and clearly the Lord has spoken through this. And he just was very nice. He said, well, Brad, if you wanted to invite high schoolers to meet Jesus, would you do it by writing them a 4-page single-spaced letter? And I said, no. I would go and hang out with them, and I would spend time with them. And then as I got a relationship with them, I'd tell them the greatest news in the world. And he's like, well, why don't you apply some of that to your fundraising? Like some of that relational rather than sending a letter. And so I met with 3 people face to face and raised all my money, right, for the chance to be. So I got to stop repossessing things and invest in kids' lives. Some of those kids are still around, and I still get to see them, and they're in my life, except they're now in the mid-40s, and so it's super fun. So fundraising started that way, and then I went on Young Life staff, and I actually met the founder of the focus group, and his name was Bill. He's passed away recently, but he was in charge of sort of teaching Young Life staff how to raise money. And then he would also help with campaigns. And so as I continued my career with Young Life, Bill was just always around mentoring me. And then eventually when he wanted to retire, he asked me if I would be willing to buy his firm, which I did. And then I've had a great time sort of running the focus group ever since. That entrepreneurial spirit of running a gumball machine business was great training for trying to develop a systematic approach to serve great ministries. The goal isn't really to get rich having a consulting firm. The goal is to have a huge impact around the world. And it's been so fun. There's about 45 of us on staff with the focus group, and we serve well over 100 amazing ministries. And I will tell you, you say, which is your favorite? It's literally the one I'm at. Like, they're all my favorite. Like, it's like picking one of your children. Which of your children is your favorite? Like, the ministries we serve are all doing the most amazing dynamic things, and it's such a privilege. So that's just a little bit of my background. Vince is a senior consultant and the vice president of the Eastern Division of the focus group. I would love for Vince to introduce himself to you. He's going to be helping me a little bit today.
I'll do my best. So my name is Vince Burens, and I am a senior consultant and the vice president for the Eastern Division. So, and I am the lead, as David said, I'm the lead consultant for Jesus Film. And I have a deep heart for what you all do in this room. Previous to actually coming to work for the focus group, I was a client of the focus group. I worked in collegiate ministry for 21 years. And so many friends and mentors of mine were in Crew Collegiate, Sam Osterloh, Mark Gothier, some of those folks that you all might be familiar with. We also, I know there's some AIA people in the room. We're from Pittsburgh, so I was one of those people on a de-iced plane this morning flying down from Pittsburgh after a tough football loss. So we support the chaplain of the Steelers, who is an AIA staff person. So please pray for him as he works with some sad football players. So all that to say, it's such a privilege to be with you all. This has been I've been to Lake Hart a few times because of our work with the Jesus Film, but it's still fun for me to be here and take pictures and send them to friends and go, I'm at Crew headquarters. Because it's such an iconic, important place in kingdom history. So I'm married, I have 2 daughters, I live in Pittsburgh, it's 3 degrees and snowing there. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you, I think, all the things that we've been able to share with so many other people, and all for the good work of the kingdom. So, thanks.
So statistically, people in development I don't make it very long statistically, right? So I just want to, how many of you have been in your role or in a development role, like less than a year? Raise your hand if you're less. I knew that we had at least one. Okay, so you all will get the most out of today, because hopefully you'll get a framework. How many people have like 1 to 10 years? 1 to 10 years. Okay, and then like 10 to 20 years? Okay, more than 20. Okay, I would like you to lead the rest of the time today. And so I have plenty to learn from you, and we have to learn from each other. But I want to start by the image of a treadmill. Like, unfortunately, I'm a runner. I love to run. I ran the Disney Marathon 2 weeks ago with my daughter. It was super fun. But this morning, when I went out to run 5 miles, the thunderstorms were intense. And so I ran on a treadmill this morning. And treadmill running is not really as much fun as enjoying God's creation, right? But sometimes fundraising can feel a lot like a treadmill, because as soon as you hit your goal, one of 2 things happen. One, you have to start over, right? You hit the goal and it's a new year and you got to raise it again. Or there's another problem. You exceed your goal and they raise your goal because you've now exceeded your goal. So you actually have a funding goal, and then you have this desire to build the kingdom of God to raise more, but then there's the next year, and it's sometimes fundraising feels like a treadmill because you're constantly having to seek after a goal. Now, when fundraising is done well, the treadmill doesn't exist in the same way because we're actually focusing on relationships and not raising money on a treadmill. But just some things about patterns that I see is that sometimes there's an unrealistic plan. Like, many of you are more experienced, but sometimes your fundraising goal is set by the need of the ministry, not by the capacity of the portfolio. So the organization says to you, we need you to raise $180,000 this year, even though the donors, if you add them up what they gave last year, they only gave $100,000. Well, where did the 180 come from? It was what your ministry needs, right? So they just push it on you. So sometimes it's an unrealistic plan. When I was here running Young Life in Orlando, we had about $1 million budget. And I remember at the beginning of the year, and that was the need based on the way I found it. I got here, I was the new executive director, I added up what our needs were. It was $1 million for this next year. This is like a long time ago, so it was a lot of money It was 20-something years ago, 22 years ago. It was $1 million need. And I added up the donors. I added up the best case. If every donor gave the best gift they could possibly give, I added it up, and it hit $1 million. So does anybody want to raise your hand about what happened that year? What do you think? Right, we did it. It was very hard. Like, it was an extremely hard year because the best case can't always happen. Sometimes things change. And so sometimes there's an unrealistic plan. There's sometimes a lack of a fundraising team. Like, we're going to talk about that today. Like, even though you might be a major gift officer or the vice president of advancement or the president, you feel like you're doing it alone. And God didn't call us to do it alone. But if you approach it that way, it creates the treadmill where you feel alone. Sometimes we focus on events. There are good events and bad events, but the reality is the larger the event, the lower the amount per person. Like, I'm going to go to my very first Jesus Film briefing in April, and I'm really looking forward to it. But it's an event. I've heard great things. It's an awesome event, but individual conversations with people are always better. And so when we focus too much on an event, we're in this problem place. Sometimes I see that every donor gets asked the same way, that we have a standard approach for each person. And that's another problem. You know, every donor is different. I remember this donor I was meeting with once asking them for $1 million gift, and I was trying to get her excited about giving a gift to a specific thing, and she just kept saying, because that worked a lot. Like, I was trying to get her to give a gift to a specific project, and she just kept looking at me saying, do you tell every kid you meet with that Jesus loves them? And I'm like, yes, but I'm also excited about this building that we're going to build at one of our Young Life camps, and I'd really like you to make a gift towards, do you tell every kid you meet with that Jesus loves them? And then I went back, and then the third time she asked me, I said, yes, we tell every kid that we meet with that Jesus loves them. She's like, okay, then I'll give you the money, right? So, like, it wasn't it was for her, it was just Jesus. I had her at Jesus, right? Even though I was selling her at something else. And then underutilizing the most effective way to raise money, meeting donors face to face. This morning at 9, I had an amazing meeting. I have been supporting a missionary in Macedonia for 8 years. And she's in the States, and she's scheduled an appointment with me at 9 o'clock to give me an update of how she's God's using her to transform the Baltic countries. This little woman that used to be my wife and I discipled her like when she was in college, right? And like, even though she lives in Macedonia, like, she has met with me about every year, either in person or via Zoom, and it's made us want to move closer to her, right? So a lot of times we have these patterns that we fall into, but the solution is this framework. The founder of the focus group named our framework Taking Donors Seriously. I probably wouldn't name it that, but so many people have used it. I would want to, like, a donor. When you hear the word donor, what do you think of when you hear the word donor? A blood donor, exactly, exactly. And it's the taking blood from your donor. Like, I don't like it, but we've been using it for 40 years, and so I'm not going to change it. But my book is called Turning Donors into Partners, and it's intentional. That I use the switch, but that's what we call it. And you know, when we have a framework, our framework, what happens is you have a year-long plan that gives you confidence, and it communicates something in advance. We're going to talk about a case statement and how to use a case statement with a major donor. I was so excited this morning when Brooke, the missionary who has obviously been through our training, pulled out her case statement and showed me effectively where I fit in her funding. And then she asked me for 3 things. She's really done her work. She said, you've been supporting us for 8 years. Here's your giving. And Brad, I'd really like you and Wendy to consider increasing your monthly support. I really need to buy a car so I can get around to all these countries. And I'd like some matching money because I would like to hire indigenous people. I said, would you like me to do 1? And she looked at me and she said, well, actually all 3 would be great. And so, so proud of her and a little intimidated. But then the idea of that we have a list of donors, like if you have a caseload, does anybody have a caseload of donors that you're responsible for? Yeah, how many is on your list? Nolan. How many? 40 to 50. 40 to 50. So he's got, how many, anybody have a bigger number? What do you have? About 100, okay. And so when we have these lists that we're responsible for, we really need to obviously prioritize them based on what? What do you think we need to prioritize them?
Giving capacity.
Giving capacity, yeah. And say more about that.
Their wealth, knowing more about their wealth and maybe what they hold.
Yeah. And one of the things, the mistakes, back to the treadmill, is oftentimes we look at people's prior giving to us, and we actually treat them based on their giving history, not their potential. So you really got an A+ with your answer. That was amazing. But the idea is that we have a list based on that speaks to their opportunity. And so that's the strategic approach. And obviously, we form this volunteer team. Now, what's very interesting is you think, Brad, are you talking about a small community nonprofit? Because if you're a small community nonprofit, then having a fundraising team makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna miss today because I'm here. My wife and I got to help start a school in St. Augustine called Veritas. It's a classical Christian school. This is our 8th year, and you're not gonna believe it, but I'm the fundraising chair. And we meet once a month, and I'm gonna miss that meeting today. And it's a group of volunteers who work together to do the work of major donor fundraising at the little school. Now, you would say, well, that makes sense. It's a school, you have a fundraising team. But I would actually say, if you have 100 people on your caseload or 40 people on your caseload, you need a fundraising team as well, because God's called you into relationships with people who they have more to offer than just money. And they become your advocates or your askers. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, how to identify the people in your sphere of influence or in your caseload that you really should be asking more of, and as a strategy to be more fundable. And the last point I would just make here as I get started is that the reason we're called the focus group is that our focus is on the few who do the most. And so we've done hundreds and hundreds of these large campaigns helping organizations raise millions of dollars, right? Our largest right now is Dallas Theological Seminary, right? We launched the campaign for $180 million. It's gonna finish at about $250 million. So we were wrong. We told them 180 and they're actually getting 250. I like being wrong. But we're called the focus group because we know that there will be 60 or less donors that'll give all the money for any of the campaigns. So the Jesus Film $150 million project, it'll still be 60 or less people that give 90% of the money. And so when you see this chart of what happened in 2021, this is just giving USA data, is that 67% of the money given in the US, the $484 billion was given by individuals. And then it's even skewed because in this bucket over here are donor advised funds, right? And so I used to give this way. Now I have a donor advised fund at the National Christian Foundation. So my money has gone from here to here. And so this number used to be about 10% before donor advised funds had developed as much. And so really, if we take about half of that, and then we add bequests, because bequests are what? People. They're just people that have passed. That's always, I started my job in development as a gift officer, plan and estate gift officer. That was my first role. And it was really hard to figure out how to say, so when you leave the stage of life, when your light dims, it's how do you say that? It's so, anyways, but if we take that and half of this, it's really 87% of the money is coming from individuals. And so at the focus group, and with today, it's really talking about people. And in America, it's a small percentage of people that are giving a disproportionate amount of the wealth. And so what we try to do is we help our friends and our clients focus on the few who can do the most so that we can get there. I have had the privilege of helping lots of development departments and lots of gift officers, and there's nothing more fun to me than working with a gift officer and opening their eyes to the opportunity and then watching them engage people relationally, and then they hit their goal for the year in 3 months. And then what they spend the rest of the year doing is good relational engagement with their donors, right? Which is the goal, as opposed to being behind and getting to the fourth quarter and feeling like you're desperate. And so that, it's been really fun to do. But ultimately, we need to start with who, not what. Like, it's all about people. Like, it's fundraising, as I said, is all about people. And you know, I will tell lots of stories today because I'm a storyteller, but my hope is that you leave with a few things that will give you a reference point. So